Good day, everyone. My name is John Corstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum at Park. And it is my pleasure today to talk about a little unusual story about not only technological advancement, but also the failure thereof of trying to build something before its time. And this is the story of the Stevens Battery. Now, I got to tell you, there's so much technological change that is going on during the early part of the 19th century. And it just so happens that one of the leading families in this process is going to be the Stevens family. This is Robert Stevens. And I have to say that, okay, what's happening? Now, during the War of 1812, Major George Bomford invented the Columbiad. And the Columbiad could take shells as well as solid shot without bursting. Okay, that's a big issue. So instead of Henry Paxahans getting all the credit for the invention of the shell gun and how to use shell in naval service, is really George Bomford. So here we are in America, all this technological change is happening. And it brought forth a lot of strange ideas about how to build a ship. It just so happened one event took place out in the Pacific. It is the sinking of the Essex in 1819 by a whale. What did said whale do? It rammed the side of the Essex, not once, not twice, I think they say 3 times. There's a nice movie about it, and it's the story that makes Moby Dick, actually. Here we have these ideas of ramming. In fact, one man, Captain James Barron, came up with an idea of creating a steam-powered ram. But the United States had already dabbled in a steam-powered warship during the War of 1812 with the Fulton I, as we call it, Demigals. And the big thing is that kind of worked. It was on a center wheel, nice, catamaran, but it was only for harbor defense. So here we know about rams. Here we know all of a sudden about explosive shells and the proper way to deliver those explosive shells, that we build what is known as the Fulton II. Now, this was an experimental ship. The engines were exposed. It had a walking beam engine, so that's not a good idea. In fact, that's the last ship the U.S. Navy will build that has exposed engines. Now, they do build paddle wheels, but, you know, it might take 2 shots to disable a paddle wheel. It just all depends. And it's unseaworthy. Matthew Galbraith Perry supervises it, and that the lessons he learns, he builds the USS Mississippi, which is famous for being the ship that opened the door to Japan, fought during the Civil War, all this great stuff. Now, we also had built an iron-hulled ship known as the USS Michigan. Now, that was built and sent up to the Great Lakes. Iron hull construction was begun in England, and we also said this is a great way to do it. However, when they tested iron hull construction, when shot go through the sides, which certain type of shot can, it would send not wooden splinters, but iron splinters that are more deadly than before. So everyone goes, wait a second, this type of hull development is not going to really work for us. Now, as you all may know, in 1851, we're arguing with Great Britain We actually have a little incident called the Pig War, where someone fires a pig from the British lines and we fire one back. It's a little more complex than that, but simply put, it's like we were on the edge of war. And the U.S. Navy looked around and goes, oh my gosh, our Navy is not up to the task. And our Navy was not up to the task for several different reasons. Basically, number one, we had started to build many ships, like the ship of the line New York that was in Gosport Navy Yard in a ship house in Bern, but also ships like the Cumberland, the Raritan. They've been laid down in the 1820s, but it's not till 1842 do they get launched, because everybody in America, everyone in America was worried that our ships were not strong enough to repel a British attack. This is 30 years after the War of 1812. So everybody is mindful of that danger that exists to the nation, unless we have a powerful amount of ships. Now, I have to say that President John Tyler, His Excellency, and Secretary of the Navy Abel Upshur thought about the War of 1812 and realized that they forced Congress to pass $8.5 million in ship construction money. Now, amidst all this comes the Stevens family. Now, the Stevens family, actually, the leader of the group is a man known as Colonel John Cox Stevens, and he's from New Jersey. Actually, he creates the town of Hoboken, and he will be a colonel in the Army, Continental Army. He will be an aide to George Washington. He, in 1790, will press for the creation of the U.S. Patent Office. Why? All these inventors are making things, and other people can say, well, that's a good idea, I'll start making it myself. And so the Patent Office was supposed to stop that. Why? Because the Stevens family were filled with inventive people. John Stevens has 13 children. 5 of them are men, and they all are inventors unto their own right. I have to say, Robert Stevens, and that's his father, okay, is the man I'm really talking about. John Stevens always pops in my mind because he's the guy that had built by Henry Steers the yacht America, and in 1851 won the America's Cup, and he was Commodore of the New York Yacht Club. So, pretty fancy dude, but his father was even greater. And his father actually will design the first steam engine. He will then also go, now it just rides around his estate, and his estate's pretty big. This is Hoboken, right? And all these piers and everything were controlled by, guess whom? The Stevens family. You can see the point off to the right, and that is where a dry dock will be built out of granite. Okay, they just clear out the granite, and so it becomes a dry dock, which they have to pump every day because the water, they just didn't think about it, but so much. But Colonel Robert Stevens also will be a inventor of many different things, safe boilers, you name it. He institutes the first ferry service between Hoboken and Manhattan using a steam-powered ship. He is there with Robert Fulton in designing ferries in steam engines for vessels. This guy is really pretty awesome. And this is, of course, their estate on Castle Point. And so I have to tell you, Robert Stevens and Edward Augustus Stevens will propose to the U.S. Navy on 13 August 1851 the construction of a revolutionary steam-powered vessel of high speed with screw propellers and all the machinery below the waterline. And this ship was going to be built out of iron. Now, nobody was thinking about iron ships at this time. They have investigated iron hull construction, but that's a whole lot different than having your whole ship to be an ironclad. And this is going to make a huge business. Now, basically, the Stevens family has a little bit of political clout, just a wee bit. I think one of them, Commodore of the New York Yacht Club. Dad worked for George Washington, and we were millionaires, and because of the patent office they set up. In fact, Robert actually designs the T-rail that is going to be used on railroads throughout America. This is so inventive, and of course, every mile of track, there's a half penny that he gets or something like that. So they are an extremely rich and powerful family. Now, when the appropriation for the revitalization of the U.S. Navy is passed, Stevens will send a little note to, of course, John Tyler, and saying that I have a revolutionary ship that will defeat every ship in the world. It's a vessel of high speed with screw propellers and will have the most powerful guns in the world. And it will be iron plated. Everyone goes, wow, but if Stevens says it can be, the track record is, oh, yes, it can be. And so in part of that $8.5 million appropriation, $500,000 are given to the Stevens family to build this ship, which, no one really knows what it looks like. The original, what we call Stephen Battery's 1841/44 design, there's very few. I've seen one plan that showed its hull, but I have to say that when they appropriate that, they first give the Stevens $250,000 just to start. But no one knew what the cost of building this ship would be. And so, as I said, they built a dry dock, installed with pumps, and the original design, whoa, wait a second. The original design, and this ship is a modification of that original design, because the original design never goes into the water, okay? And this is, of course, the Stevens battery. Its displacement was 1,500 tons. It was supposed to be 250 feet in length with a beam of 40 feet. Now, the draft is going to change because what is going to happen is when this ship is out to sea, it has higher bulwarks. When it goes, and so it's got a almost a 10-foot draft. However, no, wait a second. It had a 7-foot draft. However, it also had ballast tanks, so the ship could be lowered in the water to create less of a target. And that makes it really pretty amazing to most people. Now, that means it's semi-submersible. So what are the Stevens doing? Trying to get a submarine almost, trying to be most effective. And so Basically, it's designed to be a coastal defense guard ship for New York City. And it actually, although it's not in this picture, they have a full sailing rig. So this ship could do everything you wanted to do. Plus, they said it could make 20 knots. Now they come up, I know that's shock, but that's what they tell Washington when they ask for more money. So, hey, we're gonna, and there's no engines in this ship yet. So it was just speculation. And the Stevens name is going to carry this on to a certain extent. So they went and tested the armor, which was 4.5-inch plate with a 68-pounder gun at 30 yards. And they said that the 68-pounder barely put a dent into the armor. Wow. So this was really pretty good. However, as they're working on this ship, a guy we all know, known as John Erickson, invents the 12-inch gun known as the Oregon, and which will be placed on the Princeton, and it doesn't burst like another gun on the Princeton does. That's another story. But what I'll tell you is this gun could fire an estimated 5 miles. It could break through 5 inches of armor with ease. So the Stevens go, oh my gosh, our ship is not shot-proof. And the whole idea was to be a shot-proof ship. So Robert Stevens got ill, and I have to say, no progress was made on the ship for a little while. Number one, this ship is extraordinary for its times. It's submerged. I have to say, everything about it has never been seen in a naval ship before. However, in 1851, the U.S. Navy said, hey, what have you done with all this money? Now, I got to tell you, at this time, they have spent $500,000 of U.S. money. They have spent $223,000 of their own money, and the ship hasn't floated yet. So what does that tell you? The Navy is going, wait a second. We don't want this ship. And in fact, Secretary of the Navy George Bancroft will say that they ordered work to stop on the project, and the Navy planned to sell the vessel for scrap. Now, just think of all this time, all this money, and they're ready to sell it for scrap. However, the Stevens brothers, being famous, they go to Congress, pull some strings, and the Navy said, okay, you can rebuild it. And so let's see what you're going to do. So a new design called the Great Iron Steam Battery was designed in 1854, and it was radically different from the first plan, as the ship needed to support 6 inches of armor plate. And the nickname for this battery was along a building technologically advanced beyond comprehension. So, in other words, this ship is going to be great, but is it ever going to go to sea becomes the big question. So this is a huge new ship. This has a displacement of 4,683 pounds or tons, and it had a length of 420 feet. How long is the Monitor? 179 feet. How long is the Virginia? 269 feet. Okay, Minnesota, 302 feet. This is the biggest ship conceived here, biggest warship conceived here in the Americas. Now, the Stevens are working on this. They say it's going to have their engines. They're going to have 8 steam engines, 10 fire tube boilers, 2 screws, capable of making 8,600 horsepower. It was said that its bunkers could hold 100 or 1,000 tons of coal. But if you think about the engines, the rate of speed it's supposed to make, and they said it could go 20 knots. Now, this is all on paper, right? And so, but when you really break it all down, you start to think, oh my gosh, it's impossible for this thing to do. Now, I think one of the neatest things about it is that it is going to have a forced fan-driven ventilation system to cool the people inside. Also, they have a bomb-proof grate over the guns so that all that smoke is dissipated, and they called it bomb-proof. And I've yet to know how you can make a grated bomb-proof roof, but, you know, I'm not the Stevens brothers. And so this ship is going to have 6.75 inches of armor. And that's going to be backed by, believe it or not, 3 feet of locust wood. And they define locust wood. And actually, it's a pretty resilient wood. So they're going to arm it with 2 10-inch rifled guns and 5 15-inch shell guns. Right? Where are they going to get these guns? Well, the 15-inch had just been developed by Thomas Rodman. And so we're going to see that those guns are available. And if you want to see one of them, go to Fort Monroe. That's the Lincoln gun. So these are huge guns. They weigh 42,000 pounds. So just think of the displacement of this huge vessel. Now, not to be outdone by anybody else, they have decided that they have to create a new system of firepower. Now, you can't see it in this one, but basically the whole idea was that you have 7 guns, right? And so at each end of the Stevens battery, you can see with just one gun in the place, because no one knew what it was. It never hit the sea. So this is kind of like my dream, and I believe in the Stevens. So basically, they had these little casemates where the gun would sit up above the casemates, and that there'd be one man for each gun unprotected. However, they were mounted on a vertical shaft, and it was steam powered. And actually, the guns, once they fired, they went back on Indian rubber springs so that would stop the recoil. I'm not so sure of that. Now, once it needs to be reloaded, there are men below the gun positions, and the gun would be tilted automatically 20 degrees to align with this hole in the deck that had an iron covering, and they had an automatic ramrod that would come in, go up the gun, clean it out. They'd shoot jets of water up into the gun to cool it. Now, the idea was we're going to fire this gun fast, and so we have to keep the barrel cool, otherwise it's going to burst. And this ramrod did everything. I'll tell you, this Indian rubber spring, by the way, was 40 inches long. Okay. Now you go up to the look at the monitor turret, and you'll see that there are better ways of doing a braking system or recoil system or recoil brake than Indian rubber, so India rubber, as they would call it. Now, I have to tell you, the guys up on top, they were kind of in problems because they're open to the shot. The vessel, however, was going to have bulwarks to make it more seaworthy when steaming could be lowered to reduce its freeboard and compact, making the battery a smaller target, semi-submersible, of course, what we'd call it. By 1861, the ship is unfinished. Stevens claimed that a completed Stevens battery would have a decisive impact against the Confederacy. Now, the U.S. Navy said, hold on, we have already put into this ship $500,000, and the Stevens had put in $1 million, and the ship is nowhere near completion. So Edwin and John Stevens, Commodore of the New York Yacht Club, just remember these people these were like the robber barons type, like wealth like the Vanderbilts. And so they said, well, we'll pay for the completion of the ship. And once it goes in the water and you see how well it works, you need to reimburse us. The U.S. Navy said, this is not going to be a success. And the additional cost to get it ready, that the Stevens would forward, but then expect to be reimbursed, was $228,435. Now, when we start to think about that, that makes this ship almost a $2 million investment. And the Monitor, or the Virginia, cost $170,000 to convert. So, in other words, this is an expensive ship. No one knows if it will float. Now, the Stevens family didn't like to be told no. And so they decided that we're going to prove our point, and they're going to build a smaller version, which is going to be known as the E.A. Stevens or the Naugatuck. Now, basically, they went out and bought an iron-hulled steamer, which was built by H.R. Dunham and Company in New York City. This ship has a propulsion of twin screws, 9 knots, and they loaded it up with they say it's a 150-pounder, but that's in their dreams, because actually the ship carried a 100-pounder shotgun. Now, once again, the gun is meant to drop down and be loaded in protection. It also was semi-submersible, which is the same plan of the Stevens Battery 1855. Now, I have to tell you, the Navy said they said, we don't want it. And so the ship was sold to the United States Revenue Cutter Service, okay? And they were happy to have it because there's all these things to protect. And then all of a sudden, guess what happens? March 9, 1862, the Battle of the Ironclads. There is a need for these type of ships. And so they prepare it to go to sea. They actually add a little prow to it. And so the end result of the E.A. Stevens Naugatuck. Now, it's only called E.A. Stevens for 3 years. And when you go through the official records, half the time they're calling it the Naugatuck. The other half they're calling it Stevens Battery. And maybe once or twice they call it the E.A. Stevens. Now, I have to say that this ship is 110 feet in length. It is got a 20-foot beam. Its draft with ballast full is 9.10 feet. Empty, it's 7.8 defeat. Okay. So the U.S. Navy says no, but we want it in Hampton Roads, so they will be loaned the ship. And the ship is brought down by one of Stevens' workers, a man known as Captain Shippen. And actually, as soon as it gets to Hampton Roads, makes it here on April 9th. And believe it or not, on April 11th, what happens? The Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia comes out from the Elizabeth River and wants to challenge the U.S. Navy, especially the Monitor. Now, they all have these plans about how they're going to defeat the other ship, but the big thing is that there's a protective order for the Monitor, so the Monitor retreats, and the only ironclad to stand up to the Virginia is the Naugatuck. It gets off several shells. The Virginia kind of ignores it, and so basically we'll realize that it's a valuable ship. Now, Shippen is president of the Hoboken Land Development Company, one of Stevens' shell companies. And so the U.S. Navy says, well, we have to put a naval officer in command, and they place a man known as Lieutenant David Constable, and he assumes command on the 29th of April. Now, we know that on the early morning of May 11, 1862, the Virginia just scuttles itself. It blows up. And so now the Federals have this opportunity. They actually started the opportunity on April 8th when they sent, the Monitor and the Naugatuck against the Sewell's Point Battery, and they in turn sent the Galena and the Port Royal, Roostock, several other ships up to battle Fort Boykin and Fort Huger. What happens is now the James River is occupied by the Union, so the Virginia has to be blown up. And so this is a great opportunity. Here we have three ironclads. Just think, the Union sending this task force up the James River beginning on May 12th. They have the USS Monitor. They have the USS Galena. They have the USCRS E.A. Stevens is what it would have been called at that moment in time. Everyone's still calling it the Naugatuck because the original ship that Stevens bought to convert into this vessel was the Naugatuck. Now, I have to tell you, they went upriver, and during the engagement, now the Naugatuck is right down behind one of the steamers. I have to tell you, there are one too many steamers, paddlers that are there because there's only the Roostock and the Port Royal. You can see the Monitor, and then you can see the Galena. And the Stevens Battery, no one knew what to take of it. It was said in the New York Times that, the E.A. Stevens bravely went up to fire its gun to protect the Galena that was being struck with deadly force. Well, the E.A. Stevens, Naugatuck, whatever you want to call it, did not go up. Why? Because after 7 shots, the gun burst. And that bursting was going to actually cause one crew member to have a concussion, and Lieutenant Constable was wounded in the head by shrapnel, but he remained at his post. Now, during the battle, you could see those flashes to the side. Those are Confederate sharpshooters. So the Naugatuck moves it so that it can fire its 12-pounder howitzers into the woods to try and get rid of the skirmishers. Now, I have to say that they were only so successful. When the Galena ran out of ammunition, some people say 11 o'clock, some people say 11:30, just been hit by a shell from the Drewry's Bluff where the Confederates are, and so it backs down river. They go all the way down to City Point, and there they review what happened to this cannon. And they said that it had been fired too often in testing. Well, I don't know how well you know Parrott guns, but they burst a lot of times. And so I have to say that it was bound to have happened. So what's going to transpire now is that they look over the Naugatuck. The gun's no good. They don't have any guns to replace it. So they put all the wounded on the Naugatuck and send it back down river. And so it takes those wounded to Fort Monroe. Then on the 29 May, the Navy says to the Revenue Cutter Service, you can have this back, right? And so it's taken up to Washington Navy Yard, where it's going to be repaired, remounted, and so forth. Actually, while it's there, Lieutenant Constable has an audience with Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln is so impressed by the bravery of Constable that in front of his entire cabinet, he will say, you, sir, are now a captain in the Navy. Wow, you know. What did he do? Let his gun burst. So, note to self, I want promotion. So, by July 1862, the ship from thenceforward is going to always be referred to as the Naugatuck, and it becomes a guard ship in the New York harbor. Actually, it played a minor role in, I don't want him yet. It played a minor role in the New York riots. After the war, it was sent down to North Carolina Sounds to, guard against, disaffected Confederates and smugglers, which were one and the two at sometimes. And it stayed there until 1889 when the ship was sold for scrap. And they said they had to blow up the iron to be able to scrap it. Now, I have to tell you that we forgot that there is still a Stevens battery that has not been built. And so when Edwin Stevens died in 1868, he is going to leave $1 million to the state of New Jersey and the ship so that they can create an oversight committee and finish the ship. Why they want to finish the ship at the time, I am not sure, other than the Stevens desires to, say, yes, we could build a technologically advanced vessel. By this time, everyone's kind of moved farther forward with the design of the Warrior, and I would have to say the Wyvern, English ships that had, gone way beyond. In fact, McClellan is named engineer-in-chief. Now, remember, he is an Army officer. I don't know if his knowledge of ships goes beyond they float. And yet, he was placed as engineer involved. He redesigns the ship so that it has a turret on it with still the loading mechanism, and it has the ability to use those buckboards to be semi-submersible. He actually puts a 9-foot-long prow on the ship because he thinks about the Battle of Lissa, where, the Austrians ram a bunch of Italian ships and they win the day. So he thinks this is going to be really great. He installs 2 Madusky and Field overhead crosshead steam engines, which required 10 boilers. I think also they said it would go 15 knots. Now, I want to just tell you, it's not in the water yet. So we don't know if it can make those. So the commission, after spending $1 million from Edwin Stevens, guess what? The ship's not finished. And so they have to get another $450,000 to finish the project. This is 1874. Remember, this is a long building ship. And so the state of New Jersey says, oh, no, we're not going to pay for that. And so Edwin Stevens, I want to tell you, when he gave $1 million to New Jersey, he also endowed the creation of the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, which is one of the leading engineering schools in America. And he endows it, gives all his property, so that he gives his home on Eagle Point. And so Stevens' family, they don't have any more money they want to throw away on this battery, because Edwin's dead. Everyone involved with it is dead. So they tried to sell it to Prussia. Prussia said, can it float to get here? They said, well, we don't know, was the reply. We think so. And so, the Stevens family had already spent, since 1841, $2 million on this project. And they decide there's no more money to give, because the younger Stevens, they had other plans with the inheritance they have. And so in 1878, 74, the ship will be sold for scrap. Once again, they have to use dynamite to blow up the armor so they can break it up into smaller parts so they can actually scrap it. And ergo, since 1851 to 1874, and that's 33 years of a ship being under construction, it never hit the water. However, if it had done so, it would have been revolutionary in the 1840s. By the mid-1850s, you've had the Crimean War, and as a result of that, of course, we understood the power of ironclads, floating batteries at first. But remember, the English will build the warrior class that could indeed make 18 knots. However, the Stevens were never able to have enough money to finish the project. And so the Stevens battery is inventive, ahead of its time, but unbuildable to put in the water. So that's the story of the Stevens battery. I want to thank you all for being with us today. Of course, the Mariners Museum and Park is home to the USS Monitor Center, which I hope that those out in Netherland, I guess I'll call it, will come and visit, where you can see the replica of the ship, the original turret, and so much more. So I hope to see you all in 2 weeks. If my memory serves me well, I'm talking about the CSS Manassas, the really first ironclad of the Civil War. Okay, until then, take care.